A bit late. I had hands-on time with the Sigma 16 f1.4 for about a week. Not really sure why the duration of time makes much of a difference. The TCS TV crew spends a day at most with most of the gear that they review, so who knows. Not to say that anything that I could have to say on the subject has more authority because of the duration of time I spent with it, but it's funny how, you know, being able to speak about some things works. So these are just my opinion. Moving on, the Sigma 16mm f1.4 DCDN. I want you to savor that for a minute. Sony E-mount, micro 4/3, but mostly Sony E-mount because I'm biased, because I have a Sony E-mount camera and not a micro 4/3 camera. If only Sony made lenses like this one, you know, I know the prices would be a little bit awful, but hey, we have Sigma. Quite frankly, I didn't know that lenses like this could exist, right? Like, and I'm talking focus, speed, and accuracy every single time. My 30 isn't as accurate as the 16 was. The linear AF motor was always super quick as well. Depth of field on such a wide angle, I didn't know that was possible. The optical performance, again, I've only had limited access to the highest end gear, but I tend to try to collect some pretty good stuff, and even still, the 16 blew all that stuff out of the water. There are a number of things that I think are a concern for a lot of people, size and weight among them. I just kind of want to put that issue to rest in this video because for myself, I don't want to say too much more about it after this, but it felt really safe and secure and snug and perfectly balanced in my hand on my Alpha 6300. I think that the size and weight really aren't that big of a deal. I think that the way it felt in my hand was, and the feeling of having the camera with the lens on it in my hand was fantastic. It made me want to use the camera that I use for its technical brilliance, but not necessarily its artistic ability a little bit more. And I mean, again, the user experience, it felt so good. It was so perfectly balanced. I think, if you don't mind me using a Kaiman Wong term, the experience of using it was second to none. The autofocus system, or rather the manual focus system, is fly-by-wire, but it behaves more like the stepping motors of, for example, the 50 f1.8 STM from Canon, and so it felt very accurate when I was trying to manually focus, which I really appreciated. It was the most unique experience with a focus-by-wire lens that I've had, and I think it works. That's the best implementation of focus-by-wire that I've seen so far. I think more lenses should be able to do that. Now moving on to optical quality, superb. With a lens this wide, and it really is 16mm, it's not 24mm, it's a 24mm equivalent, it is 16mm, there's loads of distortion. What that means is that if you have people in the background in, you know, a sweeping kind of shot, they're going to start to look like cartoon characters. It means if you're a little bit off center, faces and other whichever body parts you like to put in front of them will start to get really oddly distorted, be it vertically or horizontally, or rather longitudinally. But those issues with the way that anything organic looks on the 16mm f1.4 from Sigma is true of any wide-angle lens. So you gotta know what you're getting into. While we're talking about, you know, what wide-angle lenses mean in general, let's kind of walk into a brief discussion on what the other focal ranges mean. A wider angle will push the background back and the foreground forward, or I guess the other way for you. And a more telephoto option will pull the background in and push the foreground back so that everything looks like it's more on one plane. So a wide angle has better depth rendition, while a more telephoto option makes everything look a little bit more compacted. I really like that because it allows a lot more dimensionality in an image. But going back to the lens, there is an absolute ton of distortion, but personally I love that. Like, that's part of the experience of shooting wide angle. I want that distortion to be there. I don't want it to be smoothed out. I don't tend to try to affect the distortion that most of my lenses give me because unless it's really bad one way or another, I want it to have some of those optical characteristics, because otherwise why choose those focal lengths? Personally, I'd rather play with the imperfections to create something rather than having everything be an exact, perfect view of what life is like. You know, that's kind of what photography is about a little. In my experience with the lens, there was very little ghosting or flaring at all, even at f1.4. And I could notice some then at f1.4 when I was kind of pushing everything else to help exaggerate it a little. There is, however, chromatic aberration, the magenta tones in particular, around f1.4 bouncing from reflected light off of bright surfaces can be pretty heinous. Frequently, for myself at any rate, that wasn't an issue because most of those pieces were either in the background, they were bokeh, they were blurred out anyway, or they were so small in the picture as a whole that you really had to zoom in to see. And I think that it's important taking the image as a whole rather than a 400% crop is indicative of the performance of the lens. There is pretty light, I want to say, but it's still there, longitudinal chromatic aberration as well. It is a touch unique though in that instead of green and magenta on either sides of that focus plane, it's like a blue and a teal. It's a really neat distinction, and personally I like it because it's different from a lot of my other lenses, but also it's not very prevalent. You got to kind of try to notice it. You got to try to evoke it too, so I don't think I'd worry about longitudinal chromatic aberration if I were you. And frankly, I don't think that you'll experience much chromatic aberration shooting normally unless you're doing something to kind of evoke it. The sharpness, you know, I'm constantly blown away, no pun intended, by the sharpness that these Sigma lenses bring to bear. I really, before I got into them, I had no idea that was possible. Somehow the 16 is even sharper than the 30 f1.4 from Sigma that I already own, and that's really impressive. I can't recall what the actual number is in terms of the minimum focus distance, but I know that in actual practice, it's a very short distance. With some of these pictures, I was able to get right up in the action. That motion, if you could see it, was for like the coffee shots where it, with the, I don't know what they're called, the mod bar heads. That's it. You can shove this lens into a lot of little spaces and get some really unique angles and some really unique perspectives, and I really like that. What this lens does through that kind of minimum focus distance is allow you to get shots and see the world in ways that you literally wouldn't be able to with your eyes. And that's dope. With the bokeh, there really is very little noticeable bokeh because it's a wide angle and most subjects will be farther than, you know, a reasonable variation back from minimum focus distance. But when you do push the lens into your subject, it's going to be a really nice, pleasant, creamy, aesthetically pleasing bokeh with more of a rounded shape than a harsh ovoid. And I feel like the corners, when they are ovoid-shaped bokeh balls, are not, I feel like the corners aren't pointy, if that makes any difference to you. I feel like it's a really rounded kind of a bokeh ball. Most of the image will most often be in focus, even at f1.4, because it is a really wide-angle lens. So you're gonna have to get right up in something if you want to elicit bokeh. Let's wrap up here with a couple of brief thoughts. The size and the weight of this lens really make it a pleasure, especially on Alpha 6000 series bodies. It fits very nicely. Do please try it before you knock it, especially the people that are on and on and on about size and weight, because it's an exceptional lens. This lens has really gotten me, this 16 f1.4 from Sigma has really got me believing that when Sigma comes out with a 50, 55 f1.4, that those are kind of the two lenses that I want to use for photography. The 30 f1.4 that I'm using right now, I think is fantastic for the video work that I do, largely this kind of a thing. It gives the right field of view and so forth, but for the photography that I like doing, it's mostly mid-telephoto or wide, and this is a lens that I want in my bag, and I think that it's fair to say that this would be a lens that I would highly, highly, highly recommend. Sigma lenses enable creativity through superb optical performance, excellent optical performance, even wide open, as well as fantastic pricing for what you're getting. So I would highly recommend the Sigma 16 f1.4. I think that's what I got so far. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention in this video. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Please don't hesitate to check out the Amazon affiliate links below. There will be a link to this lens down there as well. I really appreciate it. Have a good one.